Okay, this is CISS243 web database integration. I'm Mike Zellers, and probably many of you have had me in course before. What I'm going to do is I'm going to spend a very short amount of time going over the way the course is set up, because I want to get right into the content of the course as soon as possible. Canvas is a syllabus, which I'm not going to read to you, and I'm not going to go over. That's your responsibility to do, to go over the contents and let me know if you have any questions. Most of the content of the course is on the modules section of Canvas. For this week, review getting started in week 1. And you probably want to take a look at the project as well, just so you can start thinking about the semester project. And some of that you can probably do now. Some of you could start working on now. Yes?
I'm actually in the wrong class.
You're in the wrong classroom? Okay. Okay, well, that's okay. I'm glad you let me know, though. Otherwise, I would think that maybe I scared you off or something.
No, totally in the wrong class.
Okay.
All bad. Have a good day.
All right, no problem. You too. Gonna say, it's like I haven't even said anything scary yet. I mean, maybe after the first week or so when I start assigning or giving the project, I could see. For those of you that are watching remotely, we had a student exit because they were in the wrong classroom, which I said was a relief that they weren't scared away from the material. At any rate, you can review the semester project in here because it's a good idea to get started thinking about the project in advance. The one thing I do want to spend a minute talking about, and some of you, it looks like you already have it figured out, is that you can watch these lectures a couple different ways. One of the ways that you can watch these lectures is on Tuesday at 1 p.m. You can show up in BU 103. Now I'm going to be in the wrong room. BU 103. All right. Another way you can do it is by visiting my WebEx room during those times, because it will be broadcast over WebEx and you can interact in real time. So if you have questions, you can either unmute your microphone or type it in the chat, whatever you would prefer doing. Probably typing it in the chat's better, but it really doesn't matter. So that's the second way you can watch it. The third way is usually by within a few hours of the end of class, I'll post the video of the class to Canvas. So in other words, the first week lecture will appear in the week one module within Canvas. Now, this is a blended class, which means that in addition to the lectures that happen online, that you can also watch. You can, in person, you can watch online or later. We only have a lecture in person 1 day a week. The lecture is Tuesday only. The rest of the week, I have posted in the modules materials for you to work on and to review and to read and to do your best to understand. All right. One thing about this class is you should never be bored, because if you do get everything done, there's always a project to start thinking about. And getting ideas about. And if you're having difficulty with ideas for the project, by all means, let me know, and I can help you come up with some sort of idea. So to summarize, lectures are 1 p.m. on Tuesdays. You can watch them in person in BU 103. You can watch them online, live in the WebEx room, or you can watch a recording later on in the day. The rest of the time of the week, there are online resources for you to study and review. The other thing is I am very flexible as far as having time to see you and handle any problems or questions that you have. My office hours are by appointment only. I normally have been doing office hours remotely, which means that we'll connect via either WebEx or Zoom, whichever one you want to use or I want to use or whatever. We interact that way. I can meet with you in person, certainly. The lab, there's a lab on Tuesdays for people that show up in person. It's not required, but you're welcome to attend if you do have questions, or you can contact me and we can schedule a time to meet up that would work better for you. But by all means, ask. Some of the stuff in some of the material in this class gets a little tricky. All right, and it's difficult. I'm not going to lie or sugarcoat it to you. So if you're running into difficulty, don't spend a lot of time spinning your wheels. Certainly it's a good thing to try to figure out things by yourself, but it's not a good thing if that gets you to too high of a degree of frustration. So when you get to that point where you're becoming a little too frustrated, set it aside, contact me, and we'll talk about it, and I'm sure we'll be able to get you straightened out and moving in the right direction. So ask questions, email me the code, schedule a time to meet with me either virtually or in person to go over the questions that you have. All right. Some of you I know were in my CISS232 class earlier today. I think at least one person. I'm going to cover some of the same material, but we're going to look at it sort of from a different end. All right? Different perspective. Static site explained in 1 minute. Excellent. A static site is a website whose content doesn't change unless a developer goes in manually and makes a change. Those of you that have taken CISS 216, the programs that you, or the web pages that you developed are static pages. In other words, if you were to go back on your thumb drive or find them on your disk somewhere and open them up today, they're going to look exactly the same as they did when you turned them in. All right. The only way that they would change is if you or someone else went in and manually edited the code to have it look a different way. Let's see what their explanation is. Static website serves pre-built HTML, CSS, and JavaScript files. I give this analogy in a lot of my classes. A static website is when you go to McDonald's and you order a Big Mac and they turn around and look in the bin, they see a Big Mac and they take it out and put it in your bag and give it to you. All right. That Big Mac was already made. It was made in advance. And the server simply finds the Big Mac bin and gives it to you. All right. It wasn't made especially for you. If you have dietary restrictions or food preferences and like you don't eat, you don't like their special sauce or you don't want onions on it or something like that, that kind of static solution isn't necessarily going to work very well for you. All right. The opposite of a static website is a dynamic website. And a dynamic website are by far more common than static websites. Static websites provide you just information almost like just having a brochure on the computer. All right, nice and simple. Maybe if we go to a restaurant's website, let's go to one of my favorite restaurants, Blue Sky Restaurant. This is probably a static page. Information, if I visit it today and I come back tomorrow and visit it, it's going to look the same. The menu actually is linked to a PDF, it looks like. And so on. These are static. In other words, if someone wants to change this, for example, my suggestion would be to use a darker font here. All right. If they want to change that, I'd have to go into the code and manually make that change. Likewise, if the hours changed, right now their hours in Amherst are 8 to 8 every day. Well, if the hours change to their, let's say they stay open until 10 p.m. Someone would have to go into the HTML code and manually make that change to say that it's open till 10 p.m. now, right? Now, for something like a restaurant, that's probably not a bad thing to do, a static website, right? It's not horrible because you think about it, how often will a restaurant change its address? You know, this has address, email address, the phone number, the hours that they're open. How often does something like that change? Not very often, right? They're not going to pick up and move the Amherst one down the street to a different address on Levitt Road, all right? So this information contained on this website, and even when you get into the menus, which are PDFs, which are also static, they don't change the menu like every day. They don't change the specials. Well, they change the specials every day, but the Monday special is always a Monday special. The Tuesday special is always a Tuesday special, and so on. So in an environment like this, a static site might be okay. So you could probably have built a site like this after taking CISS243, and it would work reasonably well, right? It could serve the user's needs, it could serve the organization's needs, and be unchanging. And if there were changes to be made, you have to go in manually and make those changes, but that's not that big a deal because that information doesn't change that often. Now, let's contrast that with some of the other kinds of websites we see, which is like almost everyone else, right? Let's think of, I want to talk about it without necessarily logging into it. Let's talk about Facebook. Let's look at LC's Facebook page. Good. We can view that without having to log in. Now, some of this information is liable to change. If we look at this, for example, this is something that happened 22 hours ago. This is something that happened sometime yesterday. This happened sometime on the 20th, which was last Saturday, I think. But someone in our marketing department, let's say, may post about the upcoming picnic. There's a picnic on September 1st, I think it is. Yeah, Thursday, September 1st is the all-campus picnic. So are they going to have to go into their Facebook page and manually change the HTML to say, hey, there's a picnic? All right, doesn't make sense. All right. Will they, even worse, will they have to go into everyone's timeline that have subscribed to their page, that follow their page, and insert that there's a picnic coming up in September 1st? That's even more absurd. All right. Instead, what they do is they take that and they enter a post, and that gets saved somewhere. Gets saved in a database, more than likely. And then that information is used to create the web page. So this web page here that you get when you visit Lorain Community College's Facebook page, it is comprised of HTML, right? But it's not HTML that was written by a person, all right? It was written by a program or a server-side script. Now, a person wrote that program or server-side script, all right? But the actual output that the user sees was the combination of what's in the database plus what the server-side script says to do with it, right? Let me draw a diagram that I use in most of my classes to talk about the interaction between client and server. Client is someone accessing the internet and requesting web pages. How do you request a web page? You type in the address in the address bar. You click a link, anything along those lines. So you put your request out there. I want to see Lorain Community College's Facebook page. And in that link that from the Google results, there's actually a URL that gets sent. So one thing a request consists of is a URL. That request gets sent through the internet, makes it to a web server, and that web server responds. So these are two key words in web development: request and response. A request is something that a client makes to a server. A response is what the server sends back. All right? Now, the request is going to consist of a URL plus some other stuff. And we'll talk about that other stuff in a minute. All right? The response is going to be HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. There's scripting that can occur on the client side too, but we're not going to spend a lot of time talking about that in this class because the focus in this class is the scripting that occurs on the server side, right? The scripting on the client side does things like interactivity, like making a menu appear or disappear, depending if the user mouses over a menu item, all right? If you're in a photo gallery and you're scrolling through the pictures, if you click the arrow for the next picture, it will change the web page to display the next picture on the list without loading a brand new web page. All right, those are all cool things, but we're not going to focus that on this class. What we're going to focus on is instead what the server does. In the case of a static website, the server's job is easy. It finds the files on the disk for that website, for that URL, and sends them back to the client. So that's what the Blue Skies website did for us. We made a request for the home page. We made a request for a certain URL. That request got sent through the internet, made it to the server. The server says, oh, they want our home page. Here's the files for the home page. And that can include HTML, CSS, and so on. And in the case of a static web page, the server does nothing but retrieve and send those files. Just like in the case of a McDonald's, the server does nothing but take the food out of the bin and deliver it to the customer. Now, the one thing I'm just going to mention that is probably covered in some of the other classes more is protocols. Protocols are the way that servers and clients communicate. And as long as the client and the server follow the protocol, they should be able to talk to each other. So this client, in other words, could be a mobile phone. It could be a user using a laptop or a desktop machine. It could be a gaming console. It could be any number of things. It could be a script from Google that's indexing the pages on your website. But as long as it follows the HTTP protocol, TCP/IP, hey, it can talk to the server and it can get a response back from the server. Now, we don't have a McDonald's here on campus. We have a Subway, all right? And when you go to Subway, the McDonald's model sort of falls apart because Subway sort of prides itself on the fact that you can have your sandwich however you want it, right? In other words, there's a choice for the bread, there's a choice for the meat, for the vegetables, for the toppings, for the cheese. You have choices at a bunch of different places. So we might both get a ham and cheese sandwich, but yours looks a lot different than mine because you picked a different bread. You had it toasted. I didn't have it toasted. I picked certain vegetables. You picked other vegetables, and we both picked different dressings. It would be impossible to have prepared at Subway a bin with all the possible combinations of even one type of sandwich. Okay, we have a ham and cheese that's ham and American cheese. We have a ham and cheese that's ham and Swiss cheese. We have ham and cheese and Swiss cheese and lettuce. Ham and cheese and Swiss cheese and spinach and mayo. You know, if you go through those permutations, just for the one sandwich, you know, there's a ridiculous number of possibilities that you could get for just that one sandwich. When you consider all the sandwiches that they make, all right, you know, the number increases very quickly. So Subway doesn't have that model. Subway doesn't have bins with all the possible sandwiches you can order ready to deliver them. Instead, Subway has a server, the person behind the counter, that can follow a set of instructions with how to make a sandwich. Now, the first instruction they ask you, the first thing is you tell them what kind of sandwich you want. Then they ask you what kind of bread. Then they ask you what kind of cheese. Then they ask you if you want it toasted. And they follow a routine. But they don't have a finished sandwich. They have instructions for a sandwich. And that's actually what you have when you have dynamic websites. I'm generically calling all these things scripts, but think of them as instructions of how to create a dynamic web page. Oftentimes, the web server has to interact with the database in producing the sandwich that the user requests, or the web page that the user requests. You don't have to interact with the database probably to make a sandwich. Think of the ingredients as being like the database, right? If you want to continue the analogy. Now, at the end of the day, whether you go to McDonald's or go to Subway, what do you as the customer or the client get delivered? You get delivered a sandwich. That's the response from the server that you get. That's the answer to your request, is a sandwich. Same thing in web development terms. Instead of a sandwich, you get HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So it doesn't matter whether the page was pre-written out there or whether it was dynamically generated on the fly. Okay? So your Subway sandwich is made for you fresh. I think that's one of their catchphrases. All right. Your web page, when you go to Facebook, for example, is made for you fresh. All right. Based on some instructions that Facebook has about how to display your wall, some algorithm that decides what are the most relevant posts for you, and accessing the database of all the posts that people have made to Facebook. So that web page, when you go and request it, it's freshly made for you. There's not a finished copy out there waiting. It would be great if LC posted an update to their Facebook page while I was talking. But if I click refresh here, shoot, it didn't. All right. If they had, however, that would appear right here. All right. And it's not that someone went and changed the HTML code, it's that there was code that updated the database, and this page was baked fresh for me. All right. It was made fresh for me when I clicked that refresh button. Now, a great illustration of dynamic websites is Google. I'm going to Google Razor Pages. So I go to the Google result page, which is a URL of google.com/search, and I get all these things that relate to ASP.NET. I could go that same URL and give it a different search term, and it gives me everything about this topic. Went to the same URL, yet gave you different information. It's a tip off to you that these pages weren't statically sitting out there, because if you think about it, it's absurd to think of having a web page for every possible thing you can search for, right? Your search results are baked fresh for you on the fly. They are displayed. Notice something even interesting here. When I typed in Ruby, notice all the things in about Ruby relate to the programming language Ruby. It doesn't show me cost of a Ruby ring. It doesn't show me anything about the Ruby slippers from the Wizard of Oz. It doesn't show me anything about Jack Ruby, the guy who shot Lee Harvey Oswald. It doesn't show me anything about any other Rubies. It's smart enough to know this person just did a search on ASP.NET. Therefore, if they're searching about Ruby, they probably mean Ruby on Rails. And therefore, it guides the results for that. So the web results, the results of the web search, the Google search, is dynamic based on a bunch of things. Certainly based on your user input. In other words, I type in Razor page, it shows me one thing. I type in Ruby on Rails, it shows me something else. All right. It also depends, the results, on what you searched before. Say search history. It was smart enough to know because I searched for Razor pages before, if I type in Ruby, I'm probably interested in the web development connotation of Ruby. Also depends on location. That's probably best shown for doing a search about restaurants or hardware stores, let's say. Search for a hardware store. Look what the search results show us. It shows us one in Sheffield, one on Hawthorne Street. I'm not sure where that is. Is that Elyria? Looks like it is. And another one in Elyria. 10 best hardware stores near Elyria. 30 best hardware stores near Elyria. And so on down the line. By knowing my location, it can customize the results. Okay? So that's another factor that comes in. If you do a search for restaurants, you'll notice that. If you search for Italian restaurants, it will show you all Italian restaurants in the Elyria area. Which is great, which is probably what I want, because there might be a great Italian restaurant in New York City, but I'm probably not going to drive all the way there just for dinner. All right. Point is this request that I showed up here can consist of all kinds of things. Consist in addition to the URL, the input, maybe a cookie that contains the search history, the location of the user, which is derived from the IP address typically of the user, unless you have location on and you have a GPS, then it will do even a more finely tuned location for you. Point is all these ingredients come into the server and the script understands how to access the database in a way to produce the output that's best for you. That, if you want to know why Google, the folks that founded Google are so rich and why they sort of dominate the tech landscape, it's because they came up with an algorithm that can best come up with search results for you dynamically. They mastered this art of dynamic web pages by taking in all sorts of different factors that would look for all kinds of different criteria to use in coming up with the search results and giving you the most relevant ones to you, specifically you. All right. Someone in Kansas did a web search on hardware stores. They're going to see different hardware stores than someone in Elyria doing that. Okay. I sort of lumped all these things into the word scripts. What do I mean? Well, there's a variety of platforms these scripts or programs can be written in. They can be JSP, Java server pages. They can be Java servlets. We can use Ruby on Rails. And we can use what we're going to use in this class, ASP.NET. Even in ASP.NET, there's varieties of how to do it. There's a variety called web forms, there's MVC, there is, and what we're going to use, Razor pages. All right. The details of how these things look and how they do their thing are different. But they all perform sort of the basic tasks. They all can interact with a database. They all can be processed by a web server and can produce dynamic HTML that's sent back to the user. Let's look at your first lab assignment. And your first lab assignment is really just to create a static web page. Create an ASP.NET, create a web page about ASP.NET Web Forms, ASP.NET MVC, and ASP.NET Core. So you may or may not know what these terms mean. I would guess that probably everyone would have to do at least a little bit of investigation. So search the internet to find information about these topics. Take what you've learned from that and sort of come up with a summary about what those technologies represent. I don't want you just quoting what these sites say. I want you to sort of read what's said about it. You know, is this an obsolete technology? Is this a technology that's new? You know, how does it work? Those kinds of things. And come up with 3 links about each topic. You have 2 choices in doing this. You probably have more than 2, but there are at least 2 choices in doing this. One is you could make a HTML page just like you did in CISS243. All right, just like you did in Intro to Web Development, where you create the HTML and you put the things on the page, you put the links on the page. Use CSS to make it look nice and professional. And there you go. Your other option is to use a razor page. And that's the more challenging option, but it will sort of help prepare you for what we're going to be doing in the upcoming weeks. And what I like to do is take the remaining class time, which is about 13 minutes, and do a brief tour of how you create some razor pages in ASP.NET. If you don't follow what I'm saying about creating razor pages and you don't get it from looking at the examples that I've posted online, don't worry about it. Just go and create a regular HTML page. To create razor pages, you need Visual Studio, and I suggest you install Visual Studio 2022. So go into that. It's going to think about it for a while. Create a new project. It'll give us a choice of what we want to create. Now, this might vary on your particular machine, but the option we want to pick is ASP.NET Core Web App. And that is a project template for creating ASP.NET Core application with example ASP.NET razor pages. So pick that one. Click Next. You give it a name and a location. I'm going to put it on my desktop. And I'll just keep it as, well, no, I'm going to change it from web application 1. I'm going to change it to first example. You should give it a meaningful name. You shouldn't just have a web application 1 or web application 2 or something like that. Put solution and project in the same directory. That's cool. Say next. Framework, you can include that. That's fine. And click create. It's going to go out there and it's going to do some stuff for you. Look over here and put in the view the Solution Explorer. And you see all the files and stuff that you get. If you go out there and look on the desktop, we'll see already that by creating this, we create a folder that already has a bunch of stuff in it. Default stuff. Solution, the project, stuff in pages, www, etc. Now let's run this. I haven't done anything, but if you remember, the instructions said it gives you a framework. So it gives you sample pages. So let's go and run this. And see what those sample pages look like. Answer yes and don't ask me again. Answer yes. Answer yes and don't ask me again. And actually open up your application in a web browser. And this is what we get for free. We get a home page. We get a privacy notice, a place that you could put your privacy notice for the web page. And a link to the ASP.NET documentation. So cool. Did a little stuff for us. It also, if I'm not mistaken, gives us a error page. So if I type in a bogus URL, I stand corrected. It doesn't give me an error page. All right, let's look at how these pages are created. Because remember, these pages are going to contain HTML, but they're not per se HTML documents. All right. One thing when you create scripts and when you create code for the server, part of the code you create is going to be plain old static HTML, but part of it's going to be dynamic and it's going to be stuff you code. Now, in this example, everything you code is going to be static. So if we look here, underneath pages, underneath shared, you see a file called _layout.cshtml. That is the code that's going to appear on every page. Think of this as like a template. Now, the stuff specific to a page is going to appear in the index.cshtml page. So notice that the index.cshtml, the home page, only has a div. Yet when we run it, we get a bunch of other stuff too. We get some links and so on. That is because it's going to take this layout page, and wherever it says render body is where it's going to insert the HTML from the specific page. So if I look at the privacy page and the index page, they both have only a small amount of code because they share code through this layout CSHTML. So if you're doing a web page and you want something to appear on every page, you would put it in the layout.cshtml. If you only want it to appear on the one page, you would put it in the appropriate page. In this case, probably index.cshtml. So we're going to go in here and we can customize this however we want to. If I was doing your assignment, for example, I might put an H1. ASP.NET Web Forms. And a paragraph about it. Then my links. Go and run this now. When you go to the home page, that's how we get it. Again, the index page is the home page. So if I want something on the home page, I put it in index.cshtml. If I want something on all the pages, I will put it in the layout CSHTML. Let's put some verbiage to say hello, CISS243. We notice this, then that will be in the index page. It will also be on the privacy page. Why? Because we put it in the layout.cshtml. So the layout CSHTML along with the custom part of the page is pieced together to form your final web page. Now, can you change the CSS? You can. That gets to be a little tricky, and I'll have more words about this later on, but you can change the CSS. If you want to change it on every page, you would go and put the CSS on the layout CS HTML page, the underscore layout CS HTML page, which you probably would want to do because you want to keep your CSS and your look and appearance consistent from page to page. Play around with this. Review the resources I posted for you about creating creating Razor pages and so on. We're going to do a few things with Razor pages, and then we're going to get sort of the ultimate purpose of this class in doing Razor pages that integrate with the database. So we'll first study the Razor pages, and we'll get into the database stuff. If you're intimidated by this and don't want to try it for this, that's fine. You can do it just as a plain old HTML document. Now, one thing to keep in mind is when you're all done with this and you want to turn it in, you'll go to the folder that it was created in this case, first example, and you'll zip up and submit the entire folder. A lot of people are under the impression, well, all I want is the home page, so I will zip up just the home page. No. This is a project, this is an application, and for it to work, you have to give all of it because there's a lot of other files associated with the application that we really didn't get into, that there's no need for us to get into at this point, but you do need them to run this. So simply zip up the folder and submit that. To get back into it, you can just double click on the solution and get back into it. Should have taken me took me into Visual Studio 2. Visual Studio 2022. Any questions about any of this? Anyone remote have any questions about any of the stuff that I covered? If you do, please put it in the chat now. Okay, got a couple confirmations that things are okay. All right, if there are no questions, that's it for today's class. There is lab immediately following, but it is optional. You're not required to go to it. Remember, there's no class on Thursday. Instead, there's online components for you to take a look at. We'll see you next Tuesday.